The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents God is Too Weak to Exist. Now, clearly I'm talking about the Christian and Jewish gods here, but it probably applies to others as well. And when I say too weak to exist, I mean the character of God in these stories, in these religious traditions, is vanishing. Because if you think about it, just looking at the biblical God, he spoke to Adam and Eve directly and to their kids. He wrestled physically with Jacob in some form or another. He appeared as a burning bush and then decided to stop interacting directly with people and appoint Moses like his emissary, almost as if he were Benjamin Sisko. Moses, not good at talking, needs Aaron to speak for him, making me wonder why God didn't just fix Moses' speech impediment. That would seem to be better than, hang on, I'm going to do the tricks and this guy is going to talk for me, as if Moses and Aaron were some Old Testament version of Penn and Teller. But Moses brings forth plagues, turning the water to blood, cursing the area to be covered with frogs, and then lice and gnats, and then flies, as if flies and lice and gnats were really, truly different plagues. Then killed off the livestock, which I guess enough of it survived because later there was livestock to kill again. Gives out boils, curses the land with hail, locusts, darkness for 3 days. Most of these things, even in the description, could be explained as freakish natural occurrences, but still big demonstrations of power, or potentially big demonstrations of power. Then comes the death of every firstborn, including the firstborn of the cattle, which I would have thought were already dead, but I guess we just ignore some of that stuff. And so the question right at the outset is really strange. Why does God require blood sacrifices of animals? And why does God punish animals for things that humans did? Just like he punishes the offspring of humans for things their parents did. This notion of inherited sin. This is a God that's so powerful, he creates everything, and because you sinned, I'm going to punish you and all of your descendants. The sins of the father passed on to the 4th generation or the 10th generation, or bringing sin into the world, all of us are now guilty, and that's the way it goes. In the Old Testament, there's a reason why in lines and modern references it'd be like, I'm going to get medieval on your ass. I'm going to bring down some Old Testament judgment, because it was amazing the claims of potential power, where after sending floods and doing damage, then you have pillars of fire and clouds that everybody can witness to lead you by day and by night. You get food from heaven. You get situations where God freezes the sun in the sky, or actually, along with all this, we're still in the realm where God isn't actually seen doing anything or recognizably doing anything other than his emissaries are doing stuff. Turning people into pillars of salt, which, while only one family would have seen that, still is a pretty impressive demonstration of power. And then after we get out of like the Old Testament, vengeful God, massive destruction power, we get to a New Testament God who turns water into wine. Okay, I'm in favor of that one. I'm not a big wine person, but it's way better than the others. Sends demons into swine, heals the blind. And the question then becomes, why doesn't stuff like that happen now? In the ancient times, when people wanted to demonstrate the power of their God, they did amazing magic tricks. And now they wave their jackets around on stage. People fall over in ways that could be easily explained as a psychological response to the pressure and the priming. Instead of massive displays of power, we get apologists who are butchering physics and philosophy and pandering with platitudes and stories of all the wonderful things God's done that we have no evidence for. We have ministries running around claiming all sorts of healing, but there's not a single confirmed example of God healing an amputee. Oh, I had this disease and I got better. How do you know you got better? How do you know that it's because of a God? Do we have any way to investigate this? Do we have medical documentation of here's a person who had no arm and then it grew back? I'm not aware of any. You would think that would be in the journals as something incredibly and powerful, even if it just happened to one person, even if it just happened to the drummer from Def Leppard. It's all just claims. Modern apologists just claim after claim after claim. Oh, I saw somebody on TikTok the other day talking about how they saw someone in a wheelchair and they prayed over this person and they got up and walked. Well, yeah, a lot of people in wheelchairs can actually walk. Wheelchairs are not just for people who can't walk at all, but for people who can't walk far or can't walk well or need assistance with mobility. And for those people in an environment where they are primed and endorphins are pumping, of course they can get up and walk. The question is, did they go back to that wheelchair at the end of it? And even if you ask some of them, they'll be like, well, yes, because, it takes a long time for that healing to continue. Well, did you check back in with them? Did you find out if they were ever released from that wheelchair? No, they didn't follow that up. Oh, well, what about, no, you don't get to say that, Matt. My so-and-so relative had this particular disease and it was completely cured after we prayed for it. Well, where's the documentation and where's the demonstration that many of these diseases will go into remission? Why is it that everything that God can or supposedly does now is within the realm of, yeah, that kind of stuff happens. How do you know it's a God? It's not pillars of fire and pillars of clouds now. It's not paint with blood on your door or the firstborn's going to die. God doesn't heal amputees. Some caller meditates and asks a question into the universe and their confused notion of God while they play their Spotify list on random and they see something or find something important in that song and they think it's coming from God. This is divination. It's the reading of tea leaves. My grandfather was given an opportunity to invest in an oil rig, and he went to the Bible and prayed and opened it up and put his finger down, and according to him, his finger fell exactly on the phrase, invest your money. Now, I have no way to demonstrate that that's in fact what happened, rather than maybe he looked around a couple pages and boom, found something. Here's the first verse I see that has anything at all about money, and it said invest your money. But in any case, he lost that money. So was God punking him, or was he just wrong? How do you tell the difference between God's actually showing you something and you just thought God was showing you something? And if you don't have a methodology to demonstrate it, then you just have to acknowledge you're believing something without good reason. And when I talk to believers about this, the apologetics that I get, the excuses, it's not apologetics, it's excuses. Why won't God do the tricks now that he did back then? Well, if God kept doing stuff like that, we wouldn't need faith, Matt. Well, yeah, I agree. We wouldn't need faith because we'd have actual freaking evidence. And why on earth is faith a good thing? Because faith seems to be, and you are admitting it here, faith seems to be the excuse people give when they believe something when they don't have good evidence. God can either give you good evidence in the form of miracles, which is not great evidence because you have to demonstrate a causal connection, but it would be better evidence than a story about a miracle, wouldn't it? But no, then you wouldn't need faith. Well, then faith is what you have when you don't have good evidence. Well, if God showed his power like that, Matt, people would believe because they'd have no choice. Well, hang on. In those olden times in the Old Testament, there were plenty of people who were demonstrated this power of God, and yet they still chose not to worship that God. They probably believed in that God. And those of you who believe in a Satan, think that there's a Satan who absolutely knows what God is powerful of, what his capabilities are, definitely believes that God exists, but still chooses to rebel. So to whatever extent there is a choice, that doesn't seem to squash any choice. Well, you wouldn't believe anyway, Matt. You're a cynical skeptic, and God knows you wouldn't believe, so he won't do that. Okay, well then why won't he do that miracle for somebody else? And aren't you just acknowledge Aren't you just acknowledging when you say that I wouldn't believe, that then your original reasoning for saying, hey, God won't do this because then you would be forced to believe, wasn't true? So if God does it and I'm not going to be forced to believe, then all of a sudden there's no reason for God to not do it. And if God knows that I wouldn't believe, maybe somebody else would. Are you really saying that God knows that if he demonstrated massive power, he knows that nobody would change their mind? That's the weakest ass magic trick thing I've ever heard. I've watched magicians, friends of mine, do amazing, seeming miracles that would almost convince me they had supernatural powers, almost. And certainly would convince plenty of other people, but you don't think God would do it? Well, God wants you to believe for different reasons. God wants you to believe based on faith or love or whatever. That's it. That brings another question up. Why did God need to work through people instead of just clearly showing up and demonstrating his power? If the plagues and the demonstrations were so obviously demonstrations of his power, they were so obviously clear demonstrations of God's power that he won't do them anymore because it can't be that clear anymore, then at the time when he was being clear, then it would have been extremely evident that this was from God. And then he doesn't need to work through Moses. He doesn't need to prophesy and read predictions through somebody else. He can just show up and do it himself. If those things are in fact sufficient evidence, then he can just show up and do it. It's excuse after excuse after excuse from the God botherers for an increasingly weak and vanishing God concept that they can't prove. And this God seems to be, and there seems to be this need to defend by apologists. Why does God need you to defend? Why does God need you to be the representative? Why does God need you to explain to me anything? Why can't God explain to us? Why is a Damascus Road experience good enough for Paul and not good enough for the rest of us? Why is it that his representatives don't agree, can't be honest, and love to make up post hoc rationalizations? Well, God would do that except for this. Well, God would do that except for this. That these same rationalizations that apparently make them feel superior for believing on faith or being selected in gifted faith, which is exactly what you'd expect if their God wasn't real.